everyone. It's only 3 minutes since I last saw you, but now we are going on live for real with tonight's guest, Joy Rosenthal. She is a lawyer, a mediator, a law professor, and there she is. Let me get her on here. Months ago and talked all about divorce mediation, but now we're going to talk about a broader topic, which is divorce in general. What you need to know before, there you are, during, hey, after, and some of the stuff in between, especially the kids, stuff with the kids, because the kids tend to be one of the biggest pain points and concerns for our people. Like, are my kids going to be okay? How are they going to be okay, especially if I'm dealing with a really high conflict personality? So Joy's going to talk a little bit about her background before we get started, because she has a lot of experience in particular with kids. So welcome, Joy, and tell us again, in case people missed you when you were on before talking about mediation, a little bit about what you do in your background.
Well, I'm a divorce mediator in New York, and I started out representing kids in family court. So I did that for about 10 years, and then I've been a divorce mediator for about 16 years, and I also do collaborative work. So just to say up front, I don't work with a lot of super high conflict cases or where there's a lot of intense domestic violence, because those aren't usually appropriate. I certainly used to, because I was working with kids where there was abuse and neglect going on, and a lot of domestic violence is related to neglect and abuse of kids. But I really do have the child's perspective in mind when I'm working, always, if there are kids.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's so important, especially for someone who's got a background really working with kids, because the kids are the ones who are stuck. I mean, people like us, or like me, can get a divorce and get away from our exes, but the kids often can't. They have to shuttle between two different homes. And so it really impacts them more than a lot of us consider, especially as it's happening. So, I love to ask the question, what makes you good at your job? But you already answered part of that.
Well, I think one of the things that makes me unique at my job, because most divorce mediators used to be divorce litigators, and my perspective is different, right? Because I represented kids, I think it's very natural and easy for me to see it from the kids' perspective. So that's one thing that distinguishes me. Another thing is that I really listen very intently, and I was trained by wonderful mediation trainers, and really take that to heart about helping people really try to understand what's important to them and to hear each other. So that's another thing when I'm mediating. But I've also started teaching family law at the City University of New York Law School a few years ago, and that's really helped me double down on understanding the legal part of it. And I think that's a third thing. So.
Yeah, so you're working with students still. So it's like teens, kids, and now I imagine young adults, but not just young adults, because not just young adults go to law school.
Well, especially at CUNY, right? But I would say most of them are in their late 20s, early 30s. Mm-hmm. But some of them have families. Some of them talk to me about their own divorces that they're going through. Because CUNY tends to have it's a public school, and so it tends to have older students.
Yeah. Okay, so I think I got it right, but in my notes, you had said something about how the law was developed as a service to fit human needs. What did you mean by that?
That's CUNY's motto. That's not mine.
Okay.
I do not think the law was designed.
All right, tell us why. Tell us, because I was like, ooh, this is an interesting statement. Let's talk about that.
No, I actually think the opposite. I think that the law was designed for businesses and was designed for kinds of arm's length business transactions, and was not designed for families. And I don't think it's a very good instrument for working things out in families. I say to clients all the time that one of the advantages of mediation or collaborative law is that they will have the opportunity to shape their decisions. They know their situation the best. They know their strengths and weaknesses and what the kids need the best. And judges often have huge caseloads, very little time, and they really don't have the ability to get the nuanced information that's often there. I think I know you went through a really long court case, and I don't know how you felt about the judges that you saw, but I can't imagine that they could really double down and understand like all the shades of gray in your situation, or all the different colors, right?
It took a long time.
Yeah. And it's very expensive, right?
Right.
It's very stressful, very expensive, and very time consuming. And as you said, stressful on everybody. So I don't think that the law is made for families generally. I mean, of course, judges and lawyers do their best to help get at something that makes sense for everybody, but I think that it's sort of an uphill battle.
You know, it was interesting. I don't know if I told you this, Joy, but Chris and I did a presentation, I think a week or two ago, for a pod of collaborative divorce professionals. And we talked a lot about these high conflict cases. And we put the question out there to them saying, you know, since you're trained in collaboration, and you, just like what you said, Joy, people have the opportunity to customize a plan for themselves and their families moving forward far better than a judge can throw out in an order. But a few of them said, we cannot deal with high conflict cases. We can't deal with high conflict personalities. And I thought, well, that's a shame, because people like me in these situations, we need a fence put around our cases. We need for these cases not to end up in the legal system where people are just destroyed financially and emotionally, among other things, and families are just ripped apart by all these professionals getting involved. So I know I didn't talk about asking you this question, but what do you think about if collaborative law? I feel like people like you should be the best equipped to handle high conflict, instead of saying, we don't know how to deal with high conflict. We don't know how to deal with domestic violence. It's not going to work. Like, if it's not going to work in collaborative, where is it going to work? You know, what options do people like me and a lot of our audience have before it goes into the wild west of the family court system?
I'm laughing about
drop that on
the wild west of the family court system.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
yeah.
You're kind of right. I think that there's not everybody feels that way. I think there's a difference of opinion, and it's one of these situations where I think reasonable minds can differ. There's a difference of opinion about what to do when there's domestic violence in mediation or collaborative. And the way I understand it is that people will say, and I know this isn't politically correct language, and I apologize for that, but for the victim,
we welcome that. It's fine.
For the victim or survivor of domestic violence, you're kind of, and I'll say her, you're putting her again in a bad situation and victimizing her some more by not allowing her access to mediation or collaborative. So that kind of goes with what you were just saying. On the other hand, lawyers don't necessarily have experience with domestic violence, and they don't know what to do. And so if you're working with a lawyer who doesn't understand it, and doesn't understand, for instance, that it's not always physical, or not always that the psychological component is such a big part of it, and that you have to look for different things, then maybe that's not the right collaborative attorney for you. That doesn't mean no collaborative attorney isn't right, but maybe that one isn't. And you know, I think I keep thinking about Tina Turner, and you know, of course, it's when we're recording this, she just died, right? So but her experience, and she was one of the first people to really talk about domestic violence. I think she was one of the first celebrities to really talk about domestic violence, and her experience was so horrendous. And it's so clear that it was physical, but it wasn't just physical. It was financial. It was, she says he had her in bondage. That's the word she used. I mean, and I don't think it's that unusual. I actually experienced domestic violence for 10 years or something. I rarely talk about it, but it was a long time ago. And, you know, luckily I got out alive, but that wasn't guaranteed. And, you know, I mean, I know firsthand, it's a lot of things. And it was one of those situations where I just was so glad to get away that I, you know, gave up stuff that I probably shouldn't have. But I got out. I mean, and I advise clients of that sometimes. I'm like, look, you know, you could spend a lot of time arguing about money, or you could just leave. Like, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
I don't.
Well, it's tricky when the kids are involved. The thing you said about bondage, that's interesting, because we just talked to someone this past week who started the call by saying, you know, it's tricky because I didn't deal with I'm speaking as this person was. I didn't deal with physical abuse, but then went on to describe how if she didn't do what her husband said, he would hold her like for half an hour, hold her arms down, like bondage. I mean, literally. And to me, that's physical. That's restraining somebody from movement, from being able to do anything.
Right.
It's not just emotional.
Right.
Yeah. It is really tricky. Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, I think that's probably a whole other conversation about collaborative divorce professionals, but I'm glad that you mentioned it, because even in that conversation with that group, there were differing opinions. Like, some people said, yeah, I think just this conversation has made me reconsider working collaboratively with high conflict situation. I think there is hope, and I think I can handle it. And then other people were like, I think I need some more training. But that's good, because education, you and I are both educators, that can make a difference, obviously, not just for professionals, but for people in the system. And that's probably the point of this whole interview. So one of the other things that we got into a few minutes ago was your background with teenagers involved in the law, and you also worked with kids involved with foster care system. And you had said that kids are loyal to their parents and their caretakers, because we talk about how they're in the middle. Can you talk about that? Because that's a big deal in our community, where certain parents, they're like, why is my kid siding with the person that's abusing me?
Yeah, it can be so painful. And I actually just today was having a phone call with another lawyer in a case, it's a collaborative case that I'm starting, where she was questioning whether my client was doing parental alienation, and trying to say that, you know, that she didn't think, the lawyer didn't think it was that. I think that my experience talking with kids whose parents couldn't take care of them because they were using drugs, or because they were maybe there was mental illness. I'm not talking about extreme abuse cases, but in those cases, I found that kids were very loyal to their biological parents, and they didn't really care that they couldn't take care of them. They understood they can't take care of me right now, but that doesn't mean they didn't still love them. And I think they really felt very attached, even though, and forgiving and understanding of their parents' foibles. I've also seen when adults are very abusive to kids, or abusive to the other parent in front of the kids, that they feel very protective of the parent who's getting abused. So I've seen it both ways, but even when they're protective of the parent who's being abused, that doesn't mean they don't love the other parent. They still want to be around the other parent. I think kids are generally really loyal. I think it's sort of like our nature to be really loyal. And it's one of the reasons why it's hard to leave. It's one of the reasons why it's hard for kids, even if they can't relate to the parent at that time, if you know, if it looks like they're not wanting to communicate or they're playing video games all the time or something, but they still want to be around, right? They still want to know that the parent is there for them and that they're not being abandoned.
Yeah. I mean, abandonment is such a huge theme and what we deal with all the time.
Yeah, it must be. It must be. And who's abandoning who, right? You know, and when did, you know, anyway.
Yeah. Another big conversation.
Right.
Yeah. So something you also had said in the past was that you think that most parents, well, hopefully healthy parents, want what's best for the kids. And we know the courts also agrees to shield the kids from the conflict and to keep them out of the divorce process as much as possible. But some people don't know how to do that. Are there things that you've seen or common mistakes that people make that tend to still involve the kids in the conflict? Like, are there things that advice you would give to people who don't realize what they're doing, but maybe they're inadvertently involving the kids in the conflict?
Yeah. One thing is your child does not need to know why you're getting divorced. Your child, you know, you can say, mommy and I, daddy and I decided to live apart, or we fight a lot and we don't want to, you know, because probably the kids have been seeing you fighting. We decided we would get along better if we lived in different houses. I mean, of course, it needs to be age appropriate, right? So that's.
I was going to say that's not going to fly with a teenager.
That's not going to fly with a teenager, but it could fly with a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old, right? You know, and for a teenager, you can be, but you don't have to be like super honest, especially if it's something sexual in nature. Like you don't have to say daddy's having an affair, or you don't have to go into all that. But the other thing is sort of related is that your kid is not your best friend. That is still their other parent. For better or worse, that is their other parent. That's the deck of cards they were dealt. And it's not going to help you ultimately to just keep bad-mouthing them. And, you know, of course, they're going to see you crying. There's going to be times when you're screaming into the phone or something like that. Like, you can't totally shield them, but you can also try to minimize it. You know, even if you are like screaming into the phone at them, you could later say to your kid, you know, I'm not sure that was the best thing to do. Like, you don't have to like defend it, is what I'm trying to say. You know, and you've probably seen this too, that when judges are making a custody decision, especially in New York now, one of the things they're looking at the most is which parent is more willing to encourage a relationship with the other parent. And so,
absolutely,
of course, you want the kids need to be safe. Like, that's the top priority. But assuming that they're going to be safe, especially if they're old enough to let you know that whether they're safe or not, I think it's so easy because your ex is like aggravating you and frustrating you, and you wish you could get out of the situation, or you wish they would be somebody they're not. But that's not necessarily, that doesn't mean, like, fine, talk to your therapist, talk to your mom, talk to your sister, talk to your best friend, do all of that. It's important to get it out, but not to your kid. Just try to be neutral to your kid. Try to just not, you don't have to say they're a wonderful person. You don't have to lie. But if you can, just try to be neutral. They're not your best friend.
Yeah, not your confidant. Someone just asked the question, what about when there's violence that the kids have witnessed? How can somebody express whatever to the kids to make, you know, so you don't want to lie and you don't want to say too much, but they've seen it, they're there, and they're asking about it.
So let's assume that you were the victim of the violence, not the perpetrator, right? So
right.
We'll get to that in a second too,
probably.
Right? You know, I think the first thing the kid is going to want to know is, are you okay? And the extent that you're okay, you don't have to, you know, to reassure them. And I think that's true no matter how old the kid is. That's the first thing they're going to be concerned about. And then, assuming you are okay enough to be able to have this conversation, then I would turn it around and say, did that scare you? And try to help them process their emotions and try to, like, take the focus off of you and help them say, you know, what was scary about it? What could we do to make you feel safer? And if you were the person that, you know, maybe lost control and did something to somebody else, again, I think it's okay to apologize and say, oh my God, I can't believe what I just did. I didn't mean to do that. You know, I don't, and I wouldn't, when you say, I don't mean to just do that, I think there would be a tendency to say, oh, but I get so angry when they do this, this, and that, right? You have to stop at that point, right? Because that's blaming it on them. You have to take responsibility for your own actions. Oops, I didn't mean to throw that pot or whatever it was. And then you really have to do some work to figure out how you're not going to do that again, and like what was going on, and how do you prevent being in a situation where you felt like throwing that pot.
Yeah.
But I think what not to do, you don't, especially if a kid has seen or heard something, you don't want to say, oh, gaslight them, right? You don't want to say, oh, that didn't happen. You have to acknowledge that it happened, but then try to help them process it.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm not sure if you have any more things to add to that list, or else I'm going to move to another question I want to ask you about educating ourselves. Oh, wait a second, before I do that. Or, okay, would it be better to focus on the conduct of the perpetrator than in the parent? Yeah, than the parent, maybe than the parent.
I think it's important, if you can, not to blame anybody. And I would focus on trying to figure out how you can keep the child protected from seeing the violence in the future. Or protect the violence from happening in the future, put it that way. And if it means that that's the time to get out, that's the time to get out. Like maybe that's your signal. This is not safe for any of us anymore. And you know, I know this might not be a politically correct thing to say, but it's not safe for the perpetrator either, because they're in a situation where maybe they're out of control. I mean, I know I'm not trying to like have a lot of sympathy, but if they're in a situation where they're going to really do some permanent damage to you, they're also doing permanent damage to themselves. They're going to have to live with themselves for the rest of their life. So, you know, I mean, I think that might be really a signal for how do we get out and protect everybody from this situation.
Yeah. Okay, so of course, before I go to the next thing that I was thinking of, the question that always comes up, and I love to get perspectives of experts, is this question just came in: what's the best way to deal with parental alienation? My kids are 8 and 10, and my husband is letting them go where they want. I'm guessing the visitation stuff. This comes up all the time: parental alienation or abuse by proxy, because I know parental alienation is often the not politically correct thing to say.
Well, I think that it's a good question, and I don't know. If it's your spouse, your ex, saying bad things about you to the kids, I don't know exactly what to say. I'm doing the best that I can. I'm not perfect. You know, some of the things that he's saying might not be true. Aren't true. Like trust your own eyes. You know how I am. I mean, it's a little hard to know.
It's a hard question.
Yeah.
This is a really tough question. Okay, so then another question just came in. What about you get out, and this of course is another huge theme, but the child is still required to spend time with the abusive parent. Let's say the child saw the parent, the other one being really violent, you got away and the child's still stuck with the violent parent, back and forth between the two homes, which is what happens often, we know.
Yeah, so there's what you can control and what you can't control, right?
Yeah.
And you have to, some of the things, as awful as they are, if they're not in your control, then I think I would make that time with the child as supportive and loving as possible, so that they know that you unconditionally love them and there's nothing they can do to make you not love them. And then at least, no matter what they're experiencing at the other house, they have that as a solid rock to come back to.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. People often say like a soft place to land. All right. So now getting back to the main stuff with the divorce, which I promised from the beginning too, like what you need to know. You and I are both educators, and we agree that it's essential for people to know about the process starting as early as possible. So what do you see? I mean, I'm going to refrain from commenting what I see, but what do you see from people who don't understand the divorce process and don't understand how the legal system works? So the ignorant, what is the price of ignorance in this process? I have a little button that says, you think education is expensive? Try ignorance.
Right, right. I love that. But I want to hear what you have to say too. But I'll go first.
You go first.
So I think people come in with really unrealistic expectations, and they spend a lot of time trying to get across something that they think is fair. Like fair is the like 4-letter word, right? So that they think is fair, but is totally like has nothing to do with the law, or nothing to do with what would happen in court, and nothing to do with what anybody would agree on. So I think knowing what the parameters are is really important. And otherwise you spend a lot of time and money spinning your wheels. And, you know, if you had known from the beginning, maybe that would, but I think also educating yourself about the divorce process, whether it's from taking a course or reading a book or, and your book, by the way, is really terrific. I have to say, I'm going to write a review on it. It's so fantastic because you really like, I think because you and Chris have gone through it and you know so much, it's very thorough, and I'm going to definitely recommend it to my clients and my students.
Oh, thanks. Joy. I didn't
but I think
pay her to say this, by the way.
But it's really, it's really helpful to understand the framework and to understand that the way we think about things, our friends, our family, like the way people think about things and the way the law thinks about things are really different. So, you know, a lot of times people, and especially in the beginning of the process, are focused on blame, focused on he done me wrong, she done me wrong, focused on I deserve better than this, which is good. I mean, right? That's the impetus to get out. But that's not what the court really cares about. You don't get more, except in very rare extreme circumstances, you don't get more because the other person is a jerk.
Right.
You know, you might get more because you put in more or something like that. But so I think it's really helpful to understand the framework. I always say there's basically 4 things that you have to work out. You have to work out how are you going to support yourselves? That's alimony. You have to work out property distribution, who gets what. You have to work out parenting time, and you have to work out child support. And that mostly everything fits in those 4 things. And just saying that is like the beginning of a framework to begin to understand things.
Yeah. You ready
for
my list, or you want to keep going?
Yeah, no, I'm ready.
Okay, so number 1 is, I agree with you, like unrealistic expectations. I've been doing this for 9 years, and I'm not done yet because I know I'm going to have to go back for more enforcement. But just thinking that things like emotional things mattered. Like when the first volunteer lawyer I talked to, where I was just thinking about divorce, it was like, but he cheats. She goes, everybody cheats, like nobody cares, just so business about it. And I thought, well, I'm glad to know that early. Like, I'm glad that nobody cares about that stuff. But we get a lot of calls from people who say, but this person cheated, like they're such a bad person, and that's why I should get more custody. No.
Right.
So I think clarifying issues is super important, because then you know what strategy to take instead of spinning your wheels about, like you said, we call it barking up the wrong tree. One of the things we see more than anything is people blending abuse toward them with custody cases. It's totally separate issue. Like the restraining order in custody, that's different. But they'll be like, they did this to me, and I want to tell the guardian ad litem about what they did to me. But the guardian ad litem is focusing on the child, so it's like all this wasted time and energy, and maybe even making a bad impression because they're not doing what the evaluator wants. So relying on your lawyer too much for emotional support. I love my lawyer, but I should not have loved him as much as I did. I should have had other resources. Like, he's wonderful, but if I had known about all kinds of other resources, I really could have used those instead of him. But he was a great person, and one of the lawyers that did understand certain things. And I always felt like very, very emotionally supported, which is what I need. It just cost a ton of money for that.
Right.
What you mentioned,
coaches are like half the price of lawyers.
Right? Yeah, I didn't know what a coach was, and who knew that I would become one, specializing in high conflict and legal stuff. But anyway, the thing that you mentioned about other people not understanding, like things that your friends and family that think are important. We've heard the term barstool counsel. So when you're sitting next to someone and you're like, oh, this is going on in mine, they go, oh, well, you should do this because that's what I did. Totally different, often has nothing to do with the law, gets people all spun up, like, why isn't my lawyer doing this thing? And that could be really damaging. The idea of justice is something that people think, I'm going to the legal system, it's going to happen, I'm going to go in, and like in the movies, I'm going to say my case, I'll have 45 minutes to talk, and then the judge is going to validate me, and I'm going to get a prize and win. And that's not at all how it works. The amount of frustration that people, especially me, through all these years, where you go in and you think, now today's the day, like they're gonna do something, they're gonna punish somebody for lying, they're gonna punish someone for not paying order. Like, that was such a myth. Like, Chris often talks about how he would wait outside the courtroom and it'd be dozens of appearances, and every time I'm like, no, nothing happens. Like, looking at the statements on court documents, like, if you are found guilty of perjury, if you lie, blah, 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 you could go to jail. And then talking to every single attorney I've ever spoken to said, we've never seen any consequences for perjury, not a single time. So that's just like so disheartening, like, because you think the truth matters, and then you see people lie all the time and nothing happens. So that's all these, I mean, we should probably do a whole separate thing on this topic instead of let me go on and on. But those are some of the things I think that people who don't understand how things work can get very frustrated and disheartened by, whereas when you understand that this is how it works, and these are the things they don't really care about, but these are the things they do, it could be really helpful.
Well, I think, yeah, and I think one of the things to think about is that lawyers are trained in a very specific way, and judges are making decisions based on what the statute says and then what the case law is before them. And they're kind of restricted by that. And so that's one of the big differences between the way the law thinks about something and the way, like, real life. And also the movies, I mean, movies are fun to watch, but they, as you just said, they often have nothing to do or very little to do with what happens in real life. And what you're describing is people want to be heard. And there's a much better chance of that happening in mediation or a collaborative. Because the judges really don't have time to hear everybody. They don't have time to really understand the whole story. And and you might get heard, but not in the courtroom. Like that's very rare to really have the time and space to get heard in the courtroom.
Or I think especially like the way judges change too. I feel like I spent all this time and then the judge finally started getting it and then they had to switch judges because it was me. Then you start all over again. Right. Yeah, but at least we have the transcript, so that's always helpful.
Right, if they have time to read it.
Right. Or you quote a little bit.
Yeah, it's just a very difficult system, and like you were saying, like the justice is really all over there. And what you were saying about barstool lawyers, I mean, every relationship is very different and every divorce is very different. And whether the same people got divorced after 2 years of marriage or after 30 years of marriage is a very different circumstance. So the right lawyer and process for one family is not going to be the right lawyer and process for another. It's very individual, which is another reason why it's good to understand what your choices are, so you can really make a decision about what the best process is for you. Because the process that you use, and by that I mean mediation, collaborative, going to court, will make a big difference, not only in the outcome, but your experience of the divorce.
Yeah. So speaking of that, I know that I certainly did not understand a lot of the choices way back, years ago when I started this process. But you, Joy, have developed a course that gets into a lot of this stuff. Why don't you talk about it?
So I was teaching, the course is called Landing on Your Feet, A Compassionate Lawyer's Guide to Divorce. And the story behind it is that I teach family law at CUNY Law School, as I said, and I was like, these kids are not going to need this stuff for a long time, not most of them, why aren't I teaching this to people who need it? And if the way to learn about divorce, a lot of people learn about it from their lawyers, but that's very expensive because you're paying their high, steep hourly rate. Or you could read a book, but then you don't get any individual feedback. It's a good place to start. Or you could look at the internet, but there's all kinds of bad information on the internet, or incomplete information. So I developed this online course, and it's got 8 modules. So it goes through those 4 things that I talked about: alimony, property division, child support, and parenting. And also has a module on figuring out which processes are right for you, and then how to fill out the financial forms that you need, no matter what process you're in. And I'm developing a module on negotiating, and then getting ready. I think the last one is what do you do next? And so there's videos and worksheets and all kinds of stuff. And I priced it. It used to be higher priced, actually. I lowered the price because I figured, well, for the price of 1 hour of an attorney's time, people could get all this. So I priced it pretty low. So it's people who've gone through it have said that it's been really invaluable, and I've gotten wonderful feedback, and I would love for anybody who's watching to join.
So Joy, is it for someone who hasn't started the process yet? Could we call those people our babies? They're at the very beginning, but not for a grizzled veteran like myself.
Right.
Or what about someone who's kind of in the middle also?
Toddlers, right? So people who are thinking about it, people who are in the beginning stages, maybe somebody whose spouse just said, we're getting a divorce, and you're like, oh no. Or maybe somebody who just decided and told their spouse, this is it, I can't do this anymore. It's really for people, it's designed for people at those early stages, because you're right, you don't need it. You've been there, done that.
And then some. Right. So Joy, how can people find you, and how can they find out about this course?
Go to joyrosenthal.com, and then there's 2 little choices. It says Work with Joy, which is my mediation, or or learn with joy, and that's where it is. And I also do a free workshop every month called How to Save Time, Stress, and Money on Your Divorce. So you can start with that. I have a resource called a Divorce Journey Roadmap that sort of helps you understand like where you are in the process and what's going on and what to expect. So that's for free. So all of that is on joyrosenthal.com.
Yeah, and this is great. And I love that you're not just someone who's been through it, but obviously you're a law professor, you're a lawyer, you're a mediator, you're an expert. So it's not like an emotional thing. It's like this is factual, calm, and you've got the compassion behind it as well. And especially with your, like we said at the beginning of this interview, your experience with kids.
Yeah. Yeah, I try. That's all I can say. I try.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming back on again. And I'm really excited about this course. I'm sure it will help people. And if anyone listening now or in the future knows someone at the very beginning of the process, maybe not themselves only, but say a friend or a family member or anybody who could benefit from doing things properly, saving time, money, energy, stress on the and pain through going through it, then definitely get in touch. And if they, so Joy, I'll put your handle again on the under the recording of this so people can find you directly, or they can always reach out to me if they can't figure it out.
Yeah, here on Instagram, I'm at Joy Mediator. So I'd love to, and feel free to DM me with any questions. I'd be happy to answer.
Okay.
So thanks
Great.
so much, Lisa. This was really lovely. I love talking with you. We could talk for a long time.
Same. Well, we can come up with another topic, I'm sure.
Okay.
All right. Talk
Thanks
soon.
so much. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.